Introduction. If you lived in a certain working-class part of Houston in the early 1970s, you likely thought the Pied Piper had swept through the neighborhood known as the Heights, snatching up all the teenage boys. It seemed as though boys were running away in droves to join the era of peace and love, when kids were hitchhiking across the country in search of bigger dreams, better opportunities, and most of all, freedom. In the Heights, however, most of the parents knew their kids and suspected something more sinister. They, of course, were right. This was no hippie movement luring away the boys of Houston Heights. Instead, a childhood nightmare come to life was living in their neighborhood, using two equally young accomplices to lure their friends and acquaintances to a sordid, twisted death involving rape, sadistic torture and murder, all with the promise of a few beers and maybe a joint. Instead of partying, however, they ended up in the lair of the Candyman, better known as murderer Dean Corll. The former candy shop owner was a guy who had a taste for young boys, sadistic sex and blood, as one accomplice put it. Over the course of 3 years, at least 29 young men had disappeared behind the closed doors of Corll's nightmarish sex room. According to authorities, it is possible that 42 missing persons cases could have been linked to Corll and his minions. But before the era of computer tracking, before Amber Alerts, police didn't realize how high the number of runaways had grown, and only the parents living in a single neighborhood would have talked and made comparisons about their losses. It wasn't until one of the accomplices killed Corll that the remains of those boys, or most of them, as it was later determined, would be found, buried in a variety of places, including in the floor of a metal boat shed, the woods surrounding a pristine lake, and beneath the sand of a nearby beach. The case quickly gained national attention, especially when the New York Times called the killings the largest multiple murder case in United States history, and reporters including Truman Capote, who had become notorious with the release of the first true crime novel, In Cold Blood, flooded Houston. Most asked the obvious question: how could so many boys go missing from the same working-class neighborhood without anyone figuring out there was a problem? Even Pope Paul VI spoke of the crimes and offered prayers to the families of the victims. Devastated family members turned on the police, but Houston Mayor Louis Welch defended the chief of the Houston Police Department and said, "The police can't be expected to know where a child is if his parents don't." But most of those parents did know where their boys had been. They'd been headed to the swimming pool, the bowling alley, their part-time jobs, or to get a haircut, and were never seen again. And they could never have imagined the horrors their boys would go through before being, by that point, mercifully murdered at the hands of Dean Corll. And like the acts committed by multiple murderers who would soon become known as serial killers, many of those who knew the participants of the Houston mass murders would wonder what had happened that would make such a nice guy commit such terrible crimes. Then, much worse, they would wonder if Corll had killed before he had accomplices, and how many boys would be forever lost and classified as runaways, even though they were really buried somewhere, hidden beneath a layer of dirt, wrapped in a sheet of plastic.